What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Viewer discretion is advised if you're an LSU fan. What we're about to talk about tonight is going to be very graphic. It's going to be unpleasant to listen to. Texas A&M, led by head coach Mike Elko, came into Death Valley and they stuffed you in the body bag. This was a burial for Brian Kelly. If he isn't fired by the time we all wake up on Sunday morning, something is seriously wrong with the LSU decision makers. Because a few weeks ago, Brian Kelly was scolding LSU fans. He called them spoiled for not being happy with them barely squeaking out a win over a really bad South Carolina team. And you fast forward a few weeks later, LSU fans, I guess, are still spoiled in Brian Kelly's opinion, because I guess they should be okay with watching the ass whooping that they paid money to see to the hands of a team that is just as talented as what you are, but the difference is they're a better coach team. And LSU is paying Brian Kelly generational wealth for mediocrity. So we'll dive into this BTA that Texas A&M gave LSU, what it should mean for Brian Kelly. Also got some thoughts on Texas. They squeak out another overtime win, this time against Mississippi State. Alabama has won another game, and yet all everybody wants to talk about is a loss that happened 8 weeks ago for some reason. And I keep getting into these heated arguments on Twitter. I need to stay off that app with Big Ten fans who just refuse to admit that the SEC is the best conference in college football. And I got thoughts on Ole Miss win over Oklahoma. Lane Kiffin had a really funny exchange with an OU player after the game that many folks have split opinions about. And Oklahoma moving forward, things do not look pretty for the Sooners. If you live, eat, breathe, and sleep football, why haven't you smashed that like button yet? We're talking NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. This is the place to be if you are just a football junkie. JT Sports, give us a 5-star review unless you want your favorite team next week to look like how LSU did tonight. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. JT Sports is available. The links are down in the pinned comment and description down below. And let's dive into it. Texas A&M came in the Death Valley and they gave LSU 3 suplexes off the top rope. This was an absolute ass whooping. And it's disgraceful that LSU still is allowing Brian Kelly to coach this team. It's embarrassing that he was able to scold fans, call LSU fans spoiled, one of the most passionate fan bases in all of college football, for calling him out and calling this team out for not performing up to expectations. Coming into this season, LSU had one of the best rosters in college football. They returned Garrett Nussmeier, Whit Weeks, Harold Perkins, got a very good haul out of the transfer portal. The expectations was playoffs or bust. And we got a month left of the season, and LSU is eliminated from playoff contention. You got 3 losses. At this point, even if you win out, your chances of making it to the CFP are slim to none. And Brian Kelly currently has a $53 million buyout. So if they fire him right now, he'll be walking away with generational wealth for mediocrity. Because that's all LSU has been throughout the Brian Kelly experience. Nothing but mediocrity and disappointment. He got carried by an all-time great quarterback and Jaden Daniels, who has been balling out in the NFL. He had Malik Neighbors, BTJ, all this talent at wide receiver, all this talent on the offensive line, and somehow LSU has yet to make it to the playoffs. They only made it to the SEC championship once. This is not what LSU paid Brian Kelly $95 million over 10 years for. And it's embarrassing to watch LSU get drugged by Texas A&M and Brian Kelly. He's cussing out his assistant coaches. He's cussing out his offensive coordinator. He's cussing out his special teams coach. But yet, after every game in the press conference, what do you hear Brian Kelly say? This is on me. I have to coach better. I have to give these players answers. Brian Kelly, you don't have the answers because you don't know how to fix the problem. The problem is that LSU is not a well-coached football team. This is one of the most talented teams in all of college football. There was no difference between the talent that Texas A&M has and what LSU has. What the difference was is that Texas A&M was a better coached team. They were focused. They didn't have a bunch of miscommunication in the secondary. They didn't have a bunch of missed tackles like what you did on defense. Their quarterback actually looked really good, unlike Garrett Nussmeier, which Garrett Nussmeier was projected first-round pick before this season began. And every week you watch Garrett Nussmeier play, his draft stock plummets more and more, and it's not really his fault. I put everything that has went wrong with Garrett Nussmeier and LSU this year solely on the shoulders of Brian Kelly. When Brian Kelly got to LSU, he fired a strength and conditioning coach that was a part of 3 national championship winning LSU squads. And guess where that strength and conditioning coach is at right now? Texas A&M. And boy, they look like they had some really good strength and conditioning with the way they were just kicking your ass all night long. I was wondering if Texas A&M was going to put 100 on you. This is the second straight year in a row that Brian Kelly allowed a team in the primetime game in a nighttime environment in Death Valley, one of the best atmospheres in all of college football, to get stomped out like a bug. Last year, killing the board with Jalen Milroe at quarterback squashed you. And this go around is Texas A&M. If Brian Kelly still has access to LSU's facilities early Sunday morning, somebody in the front office of LSU has to go. Because there's no way that you can allow Brian Kelly to disrespect this fan base, call them spoiled. This is one of the most passionate fan bases in all of college football. And then a few weeks later, they pay their hard-earned money to watch embarrassment unfold. I'm shocked that LSU fans didn't boo the hell out of Brian Kelly when he was walking off the field. He should have been getting booed just as badly, if not worse, than how Penn State fans were booing James Franklin. And what's even stranger to me is how soft LSU's media has gone on Brian Kelly. Because if Brian Kelly was answering the Penn State's media, boy, he probably would have been crying after this post-game press conference. You know, I thought that Brian Kelly would have been able to get LSU at least to the college football playoffs this year. It's not like he's an awful coach. The issue is that he's a good program builder. He can rebuild your program up to being a 9-10 win team, but that's the peak. We've seen the peak of LSU football under Brian Kelly 2 years ago when they had Jaden Daniels at quarterback. And you have a Heisman winning quarterback and you have nothing to show for it. You have all of these great first round players that you've had enter the league and nothing to show for it. And that's all I'm going to take away from the Brian Kelly LSU experience. Nothing. You have all this potential, all this talent, and you got nothing out of it. And that proves why just because a program has a bunch of money and top-notch facilities, it doesn't guarantee success. Just because you can throw money at any player that you want, all of the top assistant coaches, any of the best head coaching candidates out there, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to pan out. You see, what Brian Kelly lacked was a connection to LSU. You know, it always felt like Brian Kelly was just trying to force himself to fit in with LSU. And I knew this thing wasn't going to work out when he first got to LSU and he was faking the Southern accent. I was like, Brian Kelly, what are you doing? Just be yourself. And when I look at Brian Kelly, I just see somebody that just is inauthentic. And it's a lot easier to root against Brian Kelly than it is to root for Brian Kelly, at least with Ed Orgeron. Despite how left things went after the 2019 National Championship squad, you still rooting for him. It was hard to root against Ed Orgeron. He was a very likable guy. The guy perfectly embodied everything that's great about Louisiana. Go Tigers. You know, it's like he had charisma. It's like you can get behind Ed Orgeron. Ed Orgeron's a coach that you would run through a brick wall for. Brian Kelly's the complete opposite. Brian Kelly is somebody that I personally, if I was Garrett Nussmeier or anybody else on that team, I would quit on him. The season's over for LSU. And you got Alabama coming up in a few weeks. And I can only imagine the atrocity that Kalen DeBoer is planning to commit on Brian Kelly and LSU, which is why they should just fire him now. Fire him so you can go into the bye week, you know, figure out who your assistant coach is going to be, and then come out of it, you know, feeling good about yourself. None of these players could be feeling good after this loss tonight. And it hurt me to see Garrett Nussmeier have to leave the game in the end. He gets benched for Michael Van Buren because, you know, he stayed at LSU. He waited his turn. He was very patient. He could have went elsewhere. He could have declared for the draft last year and possibly have been a late first-round pick, early second-round guy. And instead, he comes back for one more season because he wants to run it back. You give him that number 18, which is a jersey that only a handful of players have the ability to wear. And it just looks like the guy has just mentally checked out for a very good reason because Brian Kelly has failed him. Brian Kelly, after every game, he says that he didn't do a good job coaching this team. Yes, Brian Kelly, you're right about that. You failed your team. You failed these players. You failed your coaches. And yet all you want to do is cuss him out on the sidelines. You don't take no accountability during the game. You know, good leaders don't have to scream and cuss out the people that are under them to get the most out of them. You should be able to sit your assistants to the side and say, hey, these are the adjustments that we got to make. This is what we need to clean up. And you should be able to do it calmly. But when you're just scolding everybody, you look like an immature child. And Brian Kelly, that's what he's been at LSU, just an immature, spoiled child. I remember after the USC loss when he's pounding the table. I'm sick of it. Brian Kelly, we're sick of you. We're sick of you continuing to embarrass this great story program. No team should be able to walk into Death Valley and just give out the ass whooping that you just received tonight. It's embarrassing that LSU is paying generational wealth for this embarrassment as a head coach. Brian Kelly needs to pack his bags and get ready to coach at Tulsa, UAB, somewhere else, because he's not it for LSU. LSU will probably finish 9-3. They make it to a bowl game. They win the Pop-Tart Bowl, and they get 10 wins. But that's not what the expectation was. At LSU, the expectation is straightforward. Make it to the playoffs, compete for the SEC championship, compete for national titles. It's funny how Notre Dame upgraded with Marcus Freeman when Brian Kelly left. None of the players felt any kind of way about losing Brian Kelly. They were celebrating that Marcus Freeman got the opportunity to be the head coach. And Marcus Freeman has done in less time than what Brian Kelly was able to do in all his years at Notre Dame. Win big games, have Notre Dame close to winning the national championship. Meanwhile, at LSU, this program is just floundering on just being okay, just being good enough. And good enough doesn't cut it out of a program like LSU. It's time to move on. If Penn State paid $50 million for James Franklin to go away, then LSU should have no problem paying Brian Kelly the 50-something million that it costs for him to go away, because Brian Kelly is a cancer to LSU football. He got rid of all of the Louisiana connection that this program had when he first got there. You get rid of a beloved strength and conditioning coach, and you were just so ignorant to think that you could do it your way, that you didn't need anybody from Louisiana to win. And look what I got you. If you ever get bored during the middle of the day and you're trying to talk some football, join the JT Sports Discord server, man. Link is down in description and pinned comment below. We're trying to talk some ball with you, man. We want to hear from you. Go ahead and join the JT Sports Discord server. All the links are in the description and pinned comment section below. Texas survives Mississippi State. They come back from 17 down in the fourth quarter to get the win in overtime. This is the second consecutive overtime win that Texas has had. This looks like a 7-5, 8-4 season for the Longhorns. Entering this season, this pretty much was viewed as a national championship or bust kind of season for Steve Sarkisian in Texas. You had a guy in Arch Manning who was viewed as a generational quarterback, the projected first overall pick in next year's draft, and he hasn't played up to that level of expectation. But over these last couple of weeks, Arch Manning has started to somewhat settle in. And I feel this was his best game as a Longhorn. Unfortunately, the defense didn't play that good. And Texas overall this season, they just have done enough to win. And style points don't really matter in the SEC because due to the small discrepancy in talent between the elite teams in this conference and the average bad teams in this conference, you know, you're going to have games where you're barely able to eke out a win against a bad Kentucky team, a okay Mississippi State team, but we still don't really know what Texas is. And we have a month to go in this season. And the tough stretch of Texas schedule is upon us. You got Vandy at home next week. And then following that, you got to go on the road to Athens to play Kirby Smart and the Dogs. And then you close out this season playing the hottest team in college football and Texas A&M. It just feels like Texas is just going to just come up short of the finish line this year. And you have these NFL rumors that have popped up that Steve Sarkisian has strongly denied. He doesn't have any interest in leaving Texas at all. But I do believe where there's smoke, there is fire. And after this season, Steve Sarkisian is going to have some tough decisions to make. Do you bring Arch Manning back after how he kind of has just floundered this season? Will he even be able to improve? Are you going to be willing to part ways with some of your assistant coaches that you've been buddies with for a while? You know, the offensive line was supposed to be a strength of Texas this year, and it's been the biggest Achilles heel that this team has had. And their offensive line coach is supposed to be one of the best in the nation and also a really good recruiter. Well, the offensive line development hasn't really panned out like how it was expected to. And if you don't have good offensive line play and you have okay, just good enough quarterback play, you're not going to win a lot of games in the SEC. The difference between the best teams in the SEC and the okay, bad teams in the SEC this year, other than coaching, is quarterback play. You want to know why Vanderbilt is a top 10 team right now? Why they have a shot at making it to Atlanta? It's due to Diego Pavia. Look at Auburn. Auburn has a good roster, but they've been bad because Hugh Freeze just can't get quarterback right. So if you don't have outstanding quarterback play, you put yourself at a very big disadvantage. Steve Sarkisian is supposed to be an offensive-minded coach, but yet the offense still hasn't been what it was hyped up to be. And, Arch Manning, I don't really put a lot of the blame on him because he didn't ask for these high expectations. He didn't ask to have the Manning last name. He just unfortunately was born into a family of football royalty. So I cut him a little bit of slack. But I was expecting for the genius of Steve Sarkisian to be able to elevate Arch Manning, for him to be able to develop Arch Manning into a premier quarterback in college football, and we haven't really seen that. The run game hasn't been there. I mean, Mississippi State really should have won this game. This is the second time this season that Mississippi State had a top 25 team on the ropes, and they were able to close out the deal. They could have beaten Tennessee, and he lost that game in similar fashion. But against the best teams that you have coming up on your schedule, I don't see Texas being able to win these games. I don't see Texas being able to beat Vanderbilt. Your offense just isn't consistent enough. Arch Manning is playing good, but this is against a weak Mississippi State defense. Vanderbilt has one of the best coached defenses in this conference with a really good front seven and some of the best quarterback play that you will find in this conference. And then what's going to happen when you got to play Georgia? We already saw the nightmares that Kirby Smart was giving Quinn Ewers last year. Can you imagine the nightmares that Arch Manning's going to have going up against that Georgia defense? Although Georgia's defense has been down, if you can get to at least 27 points against Texas, you feel really good about your chances of winning. 27 is the magic number. If you can put 27 on Texas, and you say, hey, if you want to beat us, your offense has to match us or at least be able to score 30. Texas is not a team that you can trust to win shootouts. This is a team that wants to keep it low scoring. 2017, 24-17 kind of games are the ones that Texas are best equipped to win. And unfortunately, they're not going to be in a lot of those kinds of games. I just don't see Texas being able to turn around this season. This looks like a dead season for Texas. It looks like Texas is going to finish 7-5, 8-4, because the quarterback play just isn't good enough. The offensive line hasn't been good enough. And the rest of the team it's just been okay. And when you have the most expensive roster in college football, one of the most expensive coaching staffs in America, you just kind of expect a lot more. And obviously, Steve Sarkisian isn't going to get fired after this season. But next season, you start asking questions because we've yet to see Steve Sarkisian get a big win. What's Steve Sarkisian's biggest win up to this point? I really can't tell you. What, beating Nick Saban on the road in Alabama a few years ago? Okay, I'll give you that. But outside of that, there isn't really too many statement wins that Steve Sarkisian has under his belt at Texas. And you just have to wonder, have you already peaked with Sark as the head coach? He's done a phenomenal job rebuilding this program. This is the most that we've talked about Texas in years, at least since I've been watching college football. This is the first time that I've been around as a college football fan to really witness the peak of what Texas can truly be when they get a good head coach that can maximize the facilities that they have, all of the NIL money that they can put in. We have seen Texas at full power. And now they're starting to come back down a little bit to earth. The separation between Texas and everybody else in the SEC is not that wide. Texas was supposed to be in the elite tier of programs when they moved from the Big 12 to the SEC, and they aren't in that elite tier right now. Right now, they're stuck with Tennessee and LSU for being in that B tier, just being good enough. You got to the SEC championship based off technicality. You lost to a really bad Georgia team twice. Last year's Georgia team was as bad as what Georgia is ever going to be under Kirby Smart, and you couldn't take advantage of that. And now you risk Texas, your biggest in-state rival, surpassing you. Texas A&M didn't even want you in the conference. You get in the conference, and they got nothing to worry about. Mike Elko, he has just as many resources as what Steve Sarkisian has, and he's getting the most out of this team. But yet Steve Sarkisian can't for some reason. And I do feel there is a little bit of truth to him jumping ship to the NFL. As much as he wants to deny it and say that the reports are false, nobody just makes these reports out of their ass. There had to be a little bit of something for these reports to get the traction that they got. And in the NFL, they don't pay as much as what college football does, but you don't have to worry about the transfer portal. You don't have to constantly worry about recruiting 24/7. It's believable to hear that Steve Sarkisian may have a little bit of interest in the NFL. I think that he would be better suited coaching in the NFL than what he is in college football because he's a tactician. He's a schemer. You give him the players and he puts them in positions to win. But this year, though, with the amount of turnover that he has had at receiver, on the offensive line, having a quarterback that has been unable to really find his footing up until late, up to this point during the season, you have to wonder if he's kind of like, man, with all of these boosters paying all this money, the noise getting loud because I wasn't able to have the kind of season that they expected me to have, if he is a little bit tapped out on the season. Because when I look at Steve Sarkisian, I just see a guy that, unlike last year, he kind of just looks a little bit out of it. We've reached week 10 of this college football season, and yet when it comes to Alabama, everybody wants to define this team based off a loss that occurred 9 freaking weeks ago. And yet overlook the fact that Alabama has played the strongest strength of schedule in America. They have the most ranked wins out of any team in the country right now, but yet they're viewed as overrated. Their success is being diminished because of the inexplicable loss that they suffered to Florida State, who is the worst team in the ACC, who has lost 8 straight games in this conference. Look, I'm not excusing the loss. It was embarrassing. It was disgraceful. But you have to eventually move on. Life is 10% about what happens to you and 90% about how you respond. And ever since that Florida State loss, Alabama has been the best team in the country. You see, this is what pisses me off with how people like to move the goalposts about Alabama. If Alabama played a weak schedule, then you would be saying, oh, they haven't played nobody, and they lost to a bad Florida State team. But they have played the toughest schedule in America. But, they lost to Florida State, so fuck them beating Vanderbilt. Fuck them going on the road and giving Georgia their first home loss in 6 years. Fuck all of Alabama's great wins against some of the best teams in the country. Them losing to Florida State has already defined their season. And that's what irritates the hell out of me with how folks talk about Alabama. Alabama passes 2 tests when it comes to assessing if a team is elite or not. They have the schedule. So they have the body of work that shows that they're good enough to compete with any team in the country. You line Alabama up against Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, anybody else, they're going to be able to hang around and possibly win that game. But Alabama, for some reason, though, doesn't seem to get the respect they deserve because people like to run with this BS narrative that I guess every team in the SEC that Alabama has beaten was overrated. They were overranked. Yet Ohio State gets credited for beating a Texas team that's had back-to-back overtime wins against 2 of the worst teams in the SEC. They get credited for beating an Illinois team that just got ran out of the stadium by Washington, which Illinois should have never been ranked to begin with. So if you're going to discredit Alabama's schedule and say that every team that Alabama has beaten was overrated and overranked, then what about the ranked wins that Ohio State has? I don't care that Ohio State won a national championship last year. This is a new season. What you did last season doesn't matter. Being the defending national champion doesn't mean that you deserve to remain the number 1 team in college football when this is a completely different season. College football is a week-to-week sport. So I'm lost and I'm dumbfounded with how we're trying to define Alabama by one loss that occurred 9 flipping weeks ago. Did Alabama lose to Florida State last week? No, they did not. Did they lose to Florida State 2 weeks ago? No, they did not. Is Alabama 0-9? No, they aren't. They only have one loss. And if we are going off analytics and we're going off metrics and we're going off the eye test, Alabama is the number one team in college football based off those 3 criteria. But since it's Alabama and people are rooting for the downfall of Alabama, and they also have this weird precedence against SEC teams, they try to use any dumbass argument that they can come up with to justify why Alabama doesn't deserve being considered the number one team in college football, why Alabama is overrated. I had people blowing up my phone all today when Alabama was down against South Carolina. They come back and they win the game. Oh, well, they barely beat South Carolina. South Carolina isn't good. Style points don't matter. All that matters is that Alabama got the win. Alabama covered against Tennessee, but nobody talked about that. Alabama beat Georgia on the road. Nobody seems to talk about that. Alabama losing to Florida State, I guess, discredits everything that Alabama has done after that point. I guess that Alabama losing to Florida State makes this season a failure, although this is a 12-game regular season and not a 1-week regular season. Because if that was the case, then I guess we should have just gave FSU the national championship. Yes, losing to Florida State was a really bad loss, but it's not a loss that should oversee all of the body of work that Alabama has laid for this season. They have the best schedule in college football. They have the best resume in college football, but they still are getting cheated out of the respect that they deserve because of this dumbass narrative that people want to cling on to. Oh, they lost to the worst team in the SEC. Oh, the SEC is so overrated. Get over it. Who cares that Florida State beat Alabama? It doesn't effing matter. We're in week 10. It's not week 1 anymore. So why the hell are you still talking about that loss when they've had the most ranked wins in the country? Oh, but all they just beat is a bunch of propped up SEC teams. You see how people move the goalposts to diminish Alabama? But yet everybody wants to claim Alabama has fallen off, but yet Alabama still is the team that everybody can't wait to play. Alabama is the team that everybody wants to try to find any dumbass argument that they can come up with to discredit. Kalen DeBoer has the best record against ranked teams than any other head coach in America. If you are considered to be an elite head coach, you have a hard time sleeping at night before you play Alabama because you know you're going up against black hoodie Kalen DeBoer. And when Kalen DeBoer puts that black hoodie on, when Kalen DeBoer walks on that field, if you are a ranked team, you get scared because you know Alabama always is going to play their best football in the biggest games with the lights being the brightest because Kalen DeBoer is a great coach. And he is the closest thing that college football will ever see to Nick Saban. And I will live and die on this hill about that. But I'm still trying to figure out how Alabama losing to Florida State is still being talked about, even though we're in week 10 and that loss occurred 2 fucking months ago. Get over it. It doesn't matter. If you don't want the starting quarterback for your favorite football team to play like Anthony Richardson, give JT Sports a 5-star review. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, JT Sports is available. The links are down in the description and pinned comment below. It's very strange to me how every team that's ranked in the top 25 from the SEC is considered to be overrated, overranked. The ESPN is pushing this agenda. They're blowing air in the SEC's ass, trying to prop up all these SEC teams because all they care about is the SEC, even though ESPN, they broadcast Big 12 games, ACC games, Conference USA games, American games, games from the MAC. But somehow, all they care about is blowing air and the SEC's rear end. SEC bias is one of the biggest myths in college football. You see, the SEC has been on top of this sport for so long that people just have so much fatigue and they're ready for the Big Ten to knock this conference off. The gap between the top teams in the Big Ten compared to the rest of that conference is a lot wider compared to the top teams in the SEC versus the rest of this conference. Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, there's a huge gap in talent between those teams and the Minnesotas, the Illinois, the Washingtons, the USCs of the world, because those teams recruit at a very high level, minus Indiana, who is a little bit of an outlier because Kirk Cinetti just is a great coach. But other than that, when you look at the Big Ten from a wide angle and you just zoom out on that conference and you look at the entirety of that conference from top to bottom, they don't come close to matching the SEC. You can argue and say that the top four in the Big Ten is better than the top four in the SEC. I'm not going to push back on that. But the gap between Ohio State and everybody in the Big Ten is so wide that it's easy for Ohio State to blow out everybody that they play. But if you put Ohio State in the SEC and you give them Alabama's current schedule, they wouldn't blow out everybody that they have in the Big Ten with the SEC schedule because you have more teams that are not too far away in talent from what Ohio State is, because Ohio State recruits at the top 5 level every year. Everybody in the Big Ten is not recruiting at the level that Ohio State, Oregon, and some of the other premier teams in that conference do. As a matter of fact, 70-80% of the top 10 recruiting classes that we've had over the last 5 years, most of those teams have been out of the SEC. Most of the top 25 classes are the ones that the SEC is bringing in compared to the rest of the Big Ten. Teams like Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Northwestern, they don't have the ability to recruit at a top 25 level every single year. So when you're going up against Ohio State, more times than not, you're going to be outmatched talent-wise, and the game just isn't going to be that close. But in the SEC, though, nearly the majority, 85-90% in this conference is recruiting at a top 25 level. So when you look at the talent discrepancy between the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Texas of the world, it's a lot smaller comparing them to teams like Florida, Mississippi State, Kentucky. The main difference and the gap between the good teams in the SEC this year and the average teams is coaching and quarterback play. You can't win in the Big Ten with average to below average quarterback play. Iowa has been doing it for well over a decade. I don't know how. That's why I never come out and say that they need to fire their head coach, because for some reason, you can win the Big Ten having average quarterback play, but you can't win in the Big Ten the way that you win in the SEC. The SEC is the closest thing that we have to the NFL in terms of parity in this conference. 10-2 in the SEC, it's a new 12-0. Even if you were to put any of the best teams in the Big Ten, the SEC right now, they could have a loss against South Carolina or Kentucky. Because the gap between the Kentuckys, the South Carolinas, compared to Ohio State's roster is not as wide as compared to Ohio State and the rest of the Big Ten. And for some reason, Big Ten fanboys continue to blow air and this conference rear end, despite the SEC being better from an on-the-field standpoint. The SEC has cleared every other Power 4 conference in college football this season. They are 10-4 against out-of-conference Power 4 teams. Meanwhile, the Big Ten is 5-7 against other Power 4 teams and other Power 4 conferences. Why? Because the Big Ten isn't as good as the SEC. And I don't know why it's so hard to just admit that the SEC is the best conference in college football for some reason. Football lives and dies in the South. At its core, college football is born in the South and is going to end in the South because the South runs this sport. The majority of the most watched teams in this sport come out of the SEC. Why? Because football is just religion down here. In the middle portion of the country, teams like Minnesota, they're not as committed to their football program success as what they are in the SEC, which is why you see the recruiting classes as high as what they are from most teams in this conference. Most teams in the Big Ten are not recruiting at a top 25 level like how the majority of the teams in the SEC are. And I'm not saying that just because you have a bunch of 5 and 4 stars that makes you a great team, but the teams that win or at least contend for national championships are the ones whose rosters are majorly comprised of blue chip talent. There's a reason why these schools throw a lot of big money at these 5 and 4 stars. So if the stars didn't matter, then why is that you have schools like Texas, Texas Tech, LSU, Auburn, Florida, Ohio State, Oregon, giving these high school guys such a big bag? Because they actually do matter. You need to have these talented players in order to compete for a national championship. The only team that has won a national championship not having a bunch of top 10 recruiting classes was Michigan when they had Jim Harbaugh, because Jim Harbaugh is an elite talent developer. Same thing with Curt Cignetti. Curt Cignetti can win despite not having top 25, top 10 recruiting classes because he knows how to properly evaluate talent out of the transfer portal. He knows how to find guys that fit his scheme, that fit his system. But if you put Indiana in the SEC, their floor is 8 wins. Their ceiling is 11 wins, because it's a lot tougher to win in the SEC when you're playing the amount of quality teams week after week who have just as good, if not better, more talented rosters than what you have with coaching that isn't too far off. Indiana in the SEC this year, I think they will be a 10-win team. You give Indiana's Oklahoma schedule, there's no way they're as good as what they currently are right now. They're beating up on UCLA, Illinois. Imagine if you have to play Georgia, Tennessee, back-to-back weeks on the road. They barely beat Iowa. They beat Iowa 20-15, but nobody talks about that, though, because it doesn't push the narrative about the SEC being overrated, even though it's not. I was really disturbed with what I saw out of Oklahoma and their 34-26 loss to Ole Miss. John Mateer has not looked like the same quarterback ever since he's come back from that injury. He's missing a lot of big throws downfield to open receivers. He's not running the football as dominantly as what he was to start this season. And for some reason, John Mateer just hates throwing short passes. He doesn't throw a lot of checkdowns. He's just forcing footballs downfield instead of just taking what the defense gives them. And Ben Arbuckle's play calling hasn't really done John Mateer a lot of favors. Ben Arbuckle, he has a habit of calling a bunch of shot plays, even though the offensive line doesn't give enough time for John Mateer to allow those long developing routes to develop. The ground game, they don't like to commit to it as much as what they should. I'm still trying to figure out what's happened to Jaden Naught, because Jaden Naught was supposed to be one of the biggest pickups that Oklahoma got out of the transfer portal, and yet he's been completely MIA. And you don't go from being one of the better running backs in all of college football to being one of the worst running backs on your team overnight. So I don't know if Jaden Naught is injured. Oklahoma fan has to give me an update with Jaden Naught, man, because I'm trying to figure out where he's been all season long and why he hasn't been more involved in this offense. Because Oklahoma's inability to play complementary football has not just hurt this offense with how inefficient it's been, but it also has been a disadvantage to Brent Venables' defense. And Lane Kiffin absolutely worked Brent Venables in this game. This was a masterclass in play calling that Lane Kiffin put on display. Oklahoma had no answers for Ole Miss and what Trinidad Chandlis and what they were able to do on the offense side of football. And if it wasn't for the bad sequence of play calling that Lane Kiffin had in the red zone when he was trying to get a little bit too smart with the 2-quarterback system and he had to settle for a field goal. Then on the 4th-and-1 try, he ends up going with a direct snap to the running back instead of just going with the tush push. Outside of that, if it wasn't for those few bad plays, Ole Miss would have ran away from this game. What got Oklahoma back into this game was the bad sequences of play calling that Ole Miss had, and also the few blown assignments that Ole Miss had on defense, like with the big 50-something yard touchdown that John Mateer threw and the big rushing touchdown that OU had late in this game to make it a one-score game. Ultimately, Ole Miss left a few plays on the field that if they were able to make, this would have been a complete blowout. And the next 4 games that Oklahoma has coming up is the toughest 4-game stretch out of any team in America. You have back-to-back road trips against Tennessee, Alabama. Then you end this season with home games against Mizzou and LSU. I can see Oklahoma finishing this season 8-4, 7-5, which would be a major disappointment because this is a team that has the capability of being able to make it to the playoffs. And the defense isn't a problem. The offense being inefficient is what's holding back Oklahoma. Now, the offense is a lot better than what it was last year. Last year, your offense struggling just to get to 20 points. But the magic number for Oklahoma is 24-27. If you can put 24, 27 points on Oklahoma's defense, then you put their offense in a bind. This is not an offense that has the ability to methodically move up and down the field. They get their points in burst. If they're not able to get a big play downfield to a receiver and you force them to have to just take what the defense gives them, for some reason this offense just gets all out of whack. And I thought that Oklahoma this year was going to have one of the best offenses in the SEC because I was expecting better quarterback play out of John Mateer. And John Mateer has gone from a Heisman frontrunner to now just an okay quarterback. And okay quarterback play in the SEC doesn't really win you a lot of games. At best, you get 6-7 wins. You need above average or better quarterback play to compete in this conference. And Oklahoma hasn't gotten that out of John Mateer. And I believe that Oklahoma rushed John Mateer back from his injury. They rushed him because they panicked too much with Michael Hawkins. And obviously, John Mateer isn't at full health because, I mean, look at the amount of easy throws that he has missed over these last couple of weeks. Now, that still doesn't excuse his bad decision-making because in that Texas game, a lot of those interceptions weren't really him not being healthy. It was just him forcing passes that he had no business throwing. And the decision-making of John Mateer is going to really hurt Oklahoma with this next stretch of games that they have coming up because you're going up against some really good ball hawking secondaries. And if you're not going to be willing to dink and dunk and take what the defense gives you underneath, then you're going to have a hard time being able to sustain enough offense for your defense to really help you win games against some of the better offenses in the SEC because we know that Tennessee can put up points in bunches. Same thing with Alabama. Ty Simpson has been the hottest quarterback in college football up to this point. So if Oklahoma can't get their offense corrected, which they can, it's like, yeah, your offensive line isn't good, but you can overcome not having a good interior offensive line because their tackle play has been pretty good. They've had one of the best true freshman offensive tackles in America, if not the best true freshman offensive tackle in America. But the issue is just that they give up too much interior pressure up front. And if you can't protect your quarterback on the interior, then you're also not going to be able to run the football effectively, because not every run can be outside the tackles. You got to be able to run the football up the middle on a 3rd and 1. You got to be able to run the football up the gut when you get into the red zone. And the red zone offense of Oklahoma hasn't been that good either. It's just Oklahoma is still too overly reliant on their defense to win games. And we know Brent Venables is a defensive-minded coach, so we expect this to be the best area of the team. But the offense still isn't matching the production of the defense. And if Oklahoma's offense was as good as what the defense is, this would arguably be the best team in college football. And that's what frustrates me watching Oklahoma. I see a team that's good enough to be better than what they currently are. Now, 6-2 isn't bad considering the stretch that they have coming up, but this definitely was a game that I thought Oklahoma was going to win. And unfortunately, they just got outplayed. They got outcoached. And this game was a lot more one-sided and Ole Miss favored than what the final score may indicate. Because if it wasn't for a few broken plays, the big run they got in the end, Ole Miss would have ran away with this game. And they did it in Norman. As a matter of fact, the home field advantage didn't really have any effect at all on Ole Miss. Now, I want to talk about the interesting interaction that Lane Kiffin had with an Oklahoma player post-game. So there was an Oklahoma player on defense that was talking smack to Lane Kiffin all throughout this game. And once it was over, Lane Kiffin says, you ain't talking that much anymore. And then, the player comes up, he daps him up, and he says, good game. And it was just Lane Kiffin being Lane Kiffin, having fun, being the troll that he is. But a good amount of the internet has taken offense to how Lane Kiffin conducted himself in this post-game interview, with how he was talking to the Oklahoma player. Felt like he should have showed a little bit more sportsmanship. And listen, at the end of the day, these head coaches are human, and they like to have fun too. And I feel like the trash talk that Lane Kiffin had with the Oklahoma player was more so rooted in good fun. The trash talk that comes with the game of football, there's nothing really disrespectful about it. And you have this large amount of people on the internet that get so bent out of shape when you don't have formal sportsmanship. If a guy's not dapping a dude up after the game and saying good game, if he talks a little smack, people get all bent out of shape about it. There was nothing wrong with Lane Kiffin trash talking the Oklahoma player. If anything, that Oklahoma player more than likely is going to be playing for Lane Kiffin when he ends up coaching Florida next year. Because the defensive player was having fun talking trash to Lane Kiffin all throughout the game, and Lane Kiffin wasn't responding to it because he had to lock in on managing the rest of his team. But after the game, Lane Kiffin wanted to get back at him, and it was just all in good fun. And that's what makes Lane Kiffin such an interesting personality. Because, you can say he's a little bit immature, he's childlike, but that's what makes him such a great coach, as far as him being able to connect with his players. Players like a guy that is able to talk a little smack, have a little fun, and not be all serious. You see, everybody thinks that every head coach needs to be like Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, button up on the sideline with a collared shirt, giving the typical coaches speak answers and the post-game interviews. But if every coach acted like Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, then it would be boring. There would be no point in listening to these coaches' post-game interviews, listening to their post-game press conferences. If every coach had the same personality, then it just would make the sport boring. Lane Kiffin makes college football fun. Him trash talking to this Oklahoma player is what makes college football the great sport that it is, because you really wouldn't see this anywhere else. In the NFL, they trash talk a good amount, not as much as what this Oklahoma player probably was doing during this game. But in the NFL, you have a few moments in certain games when the head coach gets into it with one of the players or one of the other coaches. That's just football. This is an emotional sport. And with an emotional sport, when it's over, sometimes you're going to want to get a little something off your chest. And Lane Kiffin dapped up the player. And in his post-game presser, he said that that's one of the best defensive players in America. And it wasn't disrespectful. You don't have to look at a guy directly in his eyes to give him a fair handshake that says good game, that shows good sportsmanship. I feel that the Oklahoma fans that are bent out of shape about this are more so just bitter because they lost this game. More so the fact that Lane Kiffin was going at it with one of their players. It was just good fun. It's not like the dude after the game said, bro, you effing suck. Get out my face. You know, he had fun with them. And I feel Lane Kiffin was doing a little bit of sneaky recruiting with the interaction that he had with this Oklahoma player. He pretty much was saying, hey, bro, like, you know, you was talking a little bit of shit, but I fuck with you. You know, and if you hit that portal, I'm probably going to be one of the first people banging your line for you to come play for me. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of trash talking. You know, everybody that's trying to make this a bigger deal than what they are, you're doing the most. You're ODing on what was a moment that makes college football the great sport that it is. Follow us on all social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram at JT_, on X at JT__. TikTok, you can find us at JT__ as well. So you can stay up to date with everything that's going on with the JT Sports Podcast, along with updates and bonus content as well. Go ahead, follow us on Instagram and X. Links are down in the description and pinned comment section below. So while I was recording this episode, I had the Colorado-Utah game to the side of me, and this game was an absolute bloodbath. By the time we got to halftime, Utah had put up nearly half of 100 points. Colorado had negative 18 yards of offense. And the reason why this season has gone the way that it has for Colorado is due to the inconsistency that they've gotten from Kaidon Salter at quarterback. I felt that Kaidon Salter was a good pickup out of the portal. He was one of the best G5 quarterbacks during his time at Liberty. And with what he was able to do on the ground at Liberty, I was expecting for it to help elevate Colorado's rushing attack, which will help Colorado's offense be able to play a complementary style of football that they were unable to play with Shedeur at quarterback. The problem is Deion Sanders made the mistake of retaining Pat Shurmur. And I never was a huge believer in Pat Shurmur. He was a bad play caller when he was the OC in the NFL for the Broncos, and also when he was the head coach of the New York Giants and he was in charge of the play calling. But last year, he looked okay due to how good Shedeur Sanders was, along with Travis Hunter and the other good receivers that Colorado had. This season, though, Pat Shurmur has struggled to adapt this offense around Kaidon Salter. This offense should have been more reliant on design quarterback runs, read options, and RPOs because that plays into Kaidon Salter's strength. But Pat Shurmur keeps running the same offense with Kaidon Salter that he was with Shedeur, and they're two different style of quarterbacks. Shedeur is your prototypical traditional drop back passer. He's going to beat you from within the pocket, and he's going to throw with a lot of accuracy. He's not going to put the ball in harm's way. Kaidon Salter is just a pure running quarterback. And when you ask a pure running quarterback to throw the football 25, 30 times a game, it's a recipe for disaster because that's not really his strong suit. And Kaidon Salter, I don't know what it is about him, but for some reason, he just gets scared to throw the football to open receivers 15 yards or more downfield because he's left a lot of plays on the field that could have been the difference in a lot of the games that Colorado has lost this year. And at this point, you have a few games left. It would make a lot of sense for Deion Sanders to start Juju Lewis. And I get that Deion doesn't want to put Juju Lewis out there, risk him struggling. He loses confidence, and then he hits it for the portal. Juju Lewis, unlike Caden Salter, isn't going to be scared to throw the football. He's not going to be scared to pull the trigger on certain throws that Caden Salter just doesn't have the confidence to make. And with the receiving core that Juju Lewis is throwing to, along with a really good offensive line, I don't see any issue why Juju Lewis shouldn't be out there starting for Colorado right now. He obviously is the better option than Caden Salter. You need a guy out there who can complete the forward pass, and Caden Salter can't do that. And I love Caden Salter. He's been one of my favorite quarterbacks in college football to watch over these past 3-4 years. But unfortunately, it just hasn't worked out at Colorado because the offensive coordinator just isn't good. And the system that they're trying to run just hasn't been tailored around his ability. And next season, if Deion Sanders returns for another season, because his health is a major concern, the blood clots have forced him to have to miss a little bit of time throughout this season in practice because he's had to get that taken care of. And if Deion does return for another year, if Juju Lewis ends up being good, then I feel Colorado can find themselves right back in the mix of competing for the Big 12 championship. I don't think he needs to part ways with the defensive coordinator because the defense can only do so much when you got a quarterback that's turning the football over left and right, and the offense is inefficient. And I had some doubts about Colorado being able to build off the progress that they made last season because Colorado isn't the easiest place to be able to sustain success. That's why you keep hearing Deion Sanders' name brought up and these big head coaching vacancies that are now starting to come open, like FSU and Auburn, because it would be a lot easier for Deion Sanders to win at a bigger program with more resources and more NIL money than what it is at Colorado. And I had a homie that played for Deion Sanders when he first got to Colorado during his first season in 2023. And I asked him, what was it like? And he said, unless you just love Deion Sanders, it's going to be hard to get any recruit, unless you throw a lot of money at them, to want to play in Boulder. Because Boulder is a nice city, but it's not really a lot to do. So unless you just love Deion Sanders, there's not really a lot that's going to incentivize somebody wanting to play for Colorado, which is why you saw Jordan Seaton turn down six-figure paydays to play for Colorado because he wanted to play for Deion Sanders. And Colorado's recruiting has improved over the last couple of months. When I last talked about Colorado's recruiting, like they were like in the 90s and the hundreds. Now they're like in the mid 50s, 60s. So the recruiting is improving, but they aren't able to get the kinds of guys that the elite programs are able to get because they just can't afford them. And you can't expect for everybody to just want to take less to play for Deion Sanders because this is generational kind of money. This is generational wealth. With some of the paydays that these guys are getting, it can set your family up for life if you manage it the right way. And I just felt like this was going to be a year where Colorado was destined to take a step back just due to the limitations that Deion has to deal with coaching at that school. With the location, it's just hard to sell guys that are 5-4-star recruits that want to leave Texas, want to leave the state of Florida, to just go play in Boulder. It's nice, but it's not a lot to do out there. And with him deciding to retain Pat Shurmur, it just was a decision that Deion Sanders should have known better. And I get that Deion wants to remain loyal to his guys. He's somebody that just doesn't flat out fire coaches out of nowhere. He's pretty patient, but sometimes patience can be a detriment. And Deion Sanders, although the offense had a lot of success last year, let's just be honest, Deion Sanders got a little bit complacent with how well things went for Colorado in 2024 because we all knew that keeping Pat Shurmur was a bad decision. And Caden Salter has been the starting quarterback of Colorado a lot longer than what he should have been. Yes, Colorado gave him a lot of NIL money, but when you got a guy in Juju Lewis that has so much pristine coming out of high school, you got to give him a look. And if Kaden Salter can't get the ball to the open receiver, you got to put somebody in there that has the ability to do that. And it's time to make a change to Juju Lewis. And hopefully that can turn the season around to where Colorado can at least make it to a bowl game and you can end the season on a high note. Because if Juju Lewis plays well, then you have a lot of momentum going into 2026. And with how well the offensive line is, if you can build off the success that the offensive line has had with Jordan Seaton and a few other returning guys coming back, along with the return receivers you're going to have, then Colorado can make some noise next year if they get a new offensive coordinator not named Pat Shurmur.